Hey guys, what's up? It's the Culture Detective here, investigating your favorite animes. And yesterday I finished watching Sword Art Online, Season 1. And therefore, today I will be reviewing Sword Art Online, Season 1. It is originally a light novel written by Kawahara Reiki in the year 2009, and in the year 2012 it is released as an anime under A1 Pictures. And yeah, Sword Art Online is actually a pretty popular anime, and a lot of people say it's bad. And going into the anime, I knew that it's going to be bad, but to my surprise, it's actually even worse than I had expected. First of all, the story is essentially about a guy, Kayaba, who created a virtual MMO where essentially you put on a nerve gear, a headgear called nerve gear. You lie on your bed and you will be transported into that world, and it's almost like you're living in it. You can move in it, you can go around, you can meet people, you level up, you fight bosses, you crack the game. And one day, all these players joined the game and they got stuck there. They can't log out. And in order to log out, they have to reach level 100 and finish the game. Now, as far as the premise goes, it isn't the most groundbreaking or the most interesting premise ever, but hey, at least it's got potential. But instead, it is just ruined by some of the blandest characters. Characters as bland and as boring as white paper. We have 2 opening sequences and 1 ending sequences for this anime, and all of them are pretty generic. They're all pretty basic, pretty generic, and the animations used for these OPs and EDs are also incredibly generic. It's your average main character or some side character turning around and smiling, magic happening, people flying. It's just like a normal OP. It looks like a compilation of a bunch of clips that could have been an anime and probably is in the anime. And it's just really frustrating. And as far as the music of the OPs and the EDs go, I'm not a huge fan of them. The whole passionate rock song shtick that a lot of OPs do, it's very overused, and it doesn't really do anything for me, because to use such emotional and dramatic passionate rock songs, it is to imply that the story is equally as emotional and dramatic, but I just don't feel that way, unfortunately. Maybe it's because it's 2012 and by then passionate rock songs are not overused yet, but it's the year 2021 when I'm watching it. I'm not hyped up by it at all. And then we have the soundtrack of the anime, which I find kinda mediocre. It's not terrible, it certainly has a few good moments here and there, but overall it's just kind of forgettable and all over the place. And there's also a problem with this anime, and that is it uses too much music. Sometimes something mundane happens, yet it's blasting music for some reason. It just ruins the scene. And every single fight scene in this anime, and I mean every single, features very dramatic music, which immediately wipes away all the tension that the fights could have had. And then we have the main character of Kirito, and Kirito is one of the worst anime main characters I've ever come across. He's incredibly overpowered. He basically wins every single time, almost every single time anyways. And what I dislike about his character is that, for lack of a better word, he is a wish fulfillment character. He is the kind of character where every single girl in a 20-mile radius around him just wet their pants because Kirito is around. And he acts really nice, he acts really courageous, he doesn't have a special personality trait or anything. He's just as flat and as bland as any main characters could get. Now we have the story itself. I'm gonna go over the entire season episode by episode, but after I watched episodes 1 and 2, I was so frustrated, I actually filmed myself talk about it immediately afterwards while my thoughts were fresh, so you can watch that instead. Okay, so it's about to be 2:30 a.m. in the morning on May 30th, and I just watched the first 2 episodes of Sword Art Online, and I don't usually do this. Usually I write down my thoughts or just remember them, and then I talk about them when I review the whole thing, maybe a half a month later. But I just want to say a few things because I'm afraid that I would forget them. But yeah, these 2 episodes of Sword Art Online are bad. They are bad. And in ways that I totally did not expect. So Sword Art Online is where Kirito, the main character, basically gets stuck in a video game alongside like 10,000 people. They can't get out, they can't log out, and in order to escape the game and go back to real life, they must defeat the game, they must defeat the boss. And there are so many logical problems with this premise itself. First of all, the creator of the game created this game just for this to happen because he wants to control the world. And several people have already died in the first few minutes of this video game. And, well, not first few minutes, but in the first few minutes of episode 1, there are already people who died. And it's being reported all around the world. So shouldn't the creator of this game be held accountable? And shouldn't a lot of people around the world try to get the creator of this video game, shut down the video game, and release all these innocent people? Shouldn't that actually happen in real life? Shouldn't the police catch the creator of this game and tell this creator to shut down this game? Second of all, they can't unplug the battery to the Nerve Gear, which is the headset that brings you into the virtual world, because there's an internal battery. So how is there an internal battery that survives for months, if not years? I've only watched 2 episodes and it's already been a month. And then third, how about their real life bodies? I mean, yeah, they are active inside the game, but in real life, they're just lying on their beds. So they're gonna starve to death. Their bodies are gonna deteriorate if they don't move at all, unless there are hospitals in real life that are specifically taking care of like 10,000 vegetative people who are stuck in a virtual game, trying to keep them, trying to keep them alive by injecting nutrition and water into them and all that. It's incredibly illogical. And also, a lot of the people in this game, this is not exactly an isekai. This is a video game. This is a virtual video game where you literally enter it. And a lot of people just hang around and talk and eat food. Like, don't you have to defeat the boss as soon as possible? And yeah, you feel hungry, but a lot of people just eat food and hang out excessively, as if they're actually living in a world that they can't escape. They can't escape, but they can escape. They just have to defeat all the bosses. It's yeah, problematic, very, very problematic. And then we have the story writing itself, where on episode 1 we didn't even have act 1. We didn't even know what is Kirito's normal life. He just immediately joins the game, and he's already really good. And he meets this Klein person, and they talk for a while, and they already split up. You're telling me that on episode 1 there's already a character split up? Animes usually do this, where at some point in the story the main character and another person split up, and that another person would have their own story, and this main character would have their own story, and then they would reunite at some point in the future, far into the future, and it's going to bring a lot of lore and history to the plot. And yeah, think I know this is a really weird reference, but think Rick and Morgan in The Walking Dead. And even for that, at least there are like 2 to 3 episodes of them bonding, but in this anime, there's only like 15 minutes worth of bonding between Kirito and Klein, and then they just split up. Which is very worthless. I might as well forget about this Klein dude. And then there is Asuna, and they also had a split up at the end of episode 2. Why is there such a split up? And then another huge problem is the 1 month time jump between episodes 1 and 2. Usually, in a situation like this, the first few days and the first few weeks are the most important days and weeks where you actually see people panic, people start forming factions, these factions start to fight each other, and people start to develop strategies and plans and find loopholes in this video game. But none of those things were shown. In fact, I don't think any of those things actually happened in the game. Everybody just stood around and eat and drink and chat, which is, again, mind-boggling. Shouldn't they be focusing on getting out of the game, logging out after defeating the boss as soon as possible? It's, it's very frustrating. And, at this point, I saw Chaos Walking earlier today, and this is actually even more frustrating than Chaos Walking. It just nothing makes sense, and not even in a fun, sort of wacky, you know what, I'll let it not make sense kind of way. The whole story is built upon this premise, and this premise itself fundamentally also fails. So people in this video game lost their avatars, and their avatars in the game are now exactly like their real life selves. So anyways, this really handsome blue-haired guy, so apparently he looks like that in real life as well, tried to lead everyone into fighting the level 1 boss. He did that, and he intentionally killed himself and died for no reason, and he didn't explain why. And that death scene is supposed to be emotional and dramatic, but dude, I only knew this guy for like 5 minutes. He was in like 2 scenes. How am I supposed to feel for this guy? And then at the end of episode 2, people started realizing that Kirito is a beta tester for the video game, and they hate beta testers because they are better than everyone and they use this as an advantage to survive and win the game faster. And then Kirito is exposed to be a beta tester, and to get out of that situation, Kirito laughed hysterically and basically became the Joker and acted like a villain, which came completely out of nowhere.
俺はベータテスト中に他の誰も問題にならないくらいな。俺はビーターだ。これからは元テスターごときと一緒にしないでくれ。
And also, on episodes 1 and 2, Kirito is shown to be someone socially awkward. Why the hell would he suddenly pull off something that stupid like that? And then we have Asuna, who's also this socially awkward girl who's a bit of a loner. And then at the end, on episode 2, in that fight, she completely defies that personality completely. Again, it just makes no sense. It just makes no sense. On top of that, I forgot to mention in that video that, Kayaba basically erased all the avatars, and all the people in the game look like they are in real life. And that's kind of confusing because for some reason most of the players in SAO are apparently just a bunch of hot and cute adolescent boys and girls. Anyways, a lot of people are like, well, SAO starts off pretty strongly. Well, I disagree. It starts off pretty bad, actually. Anyways, we have episode 3, which is also extremely frustrating. And essentially, we have a time jump, half a year later, where Kirito basically joined another party, another guild, and one day the guild, alongside with Kirito, ends up in a boss fighting zone where they can't teleport away, and the boss basically killed all Kirito's teammates, and Kirito survives. That's the entire episode, and we're supposed to feel bad for those characters when those characters are only on screen for like 15 minutes. How am I supposed to relate to a bunch of characters when they're barely shown on screen? It's stupid, especially the final scene of episode 3, where essentially it's been an entire year since this has happened, and it's Christmas, and Kirito received a posthumous present from this girl called Sachi, and Sachi was one of the victims of the bosses. Also in the game, if you die in the game, you die in real life. So Sachi basically died in episode 3, and half a year has passed. Kirito receives a posthumous present from Sachi, and Kirito is just crying. He's just crying, and he's just really angry and sad. And usually when movies or TV shows do this, yeah, it's emotional, it's dramatic. Except the character who died only showed up on screen for like 15 minutes. I have no feelings towards a character which only showed up on screen for 15 minutes. It is not built up. There's no relationship happening. There's no bonding. I mean, there is, but not nearly enough. So it tries to be very powerful and impactful, and it's just so toothless and weightless. Anyways, we have episodes 4 to 6, where we have this murder mystery arc, and at first it does feel like something interesting is finally happening, except the murder mystery arc ended in 2 episodes. Usually arcs in animes run longer, maybe 5 episodes, maybe 6 episodes, but usually longer than 2 episodes. It just feels like it came and went. It doesn't do anything for anything, really. It isn't related to the central theme of the story. It isn't related to the main driving arc of the story. There is no main driving arc of the story, in fact. It's just there, and then it ends, and then that's it. And then we have episode 7 to 9, where it's just Kirito and Asuna fighting a bunch of monsters, and then that's it. Kind of boring. Most of the monsters aren't even all that scary. They're big, they look very muscular, but they don't invoke fear. They're just kind of typical and plain, really. And then we have episode 10, and episode 10 is actually surprisingly probably my second favorite episode of this entire season, because, okay, minor spoiler alert, but essentially Kirito and Asuna were together. They fell in love with one another. And Asuna is the vice chairperson of the guild known as Knights of Blood. And the chairperson of Knights of Blood didn't want Kirito to take Asuna from him, so he decided to have a duel with Kirito. And his name is Heathcliff. So Heathcliff versus Kirito. There's a duel between the two of them, and Kirito actually lost. And I actually respect this decision. Kirito is not overpowered, actually, at least in this scene, and it actually makes for an interesting change of pace. And then in the last scene of the entire episode, we have Kirito up against a spy from Knights of Blood, who's secretly trying to kill Kirito. And that fight scene was also pretty intense and pretty well written in the standards of this show anyways. And then we have episode 11, which is also not that bad in my opinion. Essentially, Kirito and Asuna decided to not fight bosses anymore, and they decided to just live together in a nice little house in the forest. One day, they went walking, and they found a little girl, and that little girl apparently had an amnesia and called Asuna Mama and Kirito Papa. And at first, I thought that little girl, whose name is Yui, I thought it is part of their marriage, where essentially Kirito and Asuna got married, and it's in the game's mechanics. for a child to mysteriously appear as a part of the marriage feature. And I actually laughed, but apparently it's not that. Yui apparently is this AI anomaly in the game, and at first she does seem like a pretty mysterious character, and it does seem like this is going to an interesting direction until episode 12, where Yui's character is given a really crappy explanation. That is, she's just an AI anomaly, and when she's about to die, we have one of the worst scenes of the entire anime, where essentially Kirito manages to save her before she dies. And Mother's Basement, in fact, did a pretty good video essay on how terrible this scene is and how it totally ruins the mood and the drama and the weight of the show, so I highly suggest you to check that out. But essentially, we move on to episodes 13 and 14, which is the last two episodes of the Aincrad arc. And yeah, we finally have the final villain. The final villain is the maker of the game himself, and boy, the fight is too short. The fight lasted for like 10 minutes. And JoJo usually fights with the final boss lasts for 5 episodes, which is about 100 minutes. But in Sword Art Online, it only lasted for 10 minutes. It's kinda anticlimactic, actually. Also, the final villain only appeared at the very, very end. Everything prior to him showing up at the end basically means nothing. It's just a bunch of fillers. But anyways, we have the final fight, and then that's it. Everybody survived at the end. Also, one thing I really, really hate about Aincrad arc is the crazy numbers of time jumps in the story. There's always a 5-month time jump, a 6-month time jump, a 1-year time jump. And that is very frustrating and irritating in my opinion. Look, I love time jumps. When a very dramatic story have time jumps, it's usually very daunting. Like Attack on Titan, when we have the 4-year time jump, it's like I'm in a whole new world. Or in Death Note, there are a lot of time jumps in Death Note, and it just gives a sense of weight and reality to the story, which I really love. Hey, even Avengers Endgame has a 5-year time jump, which hurts as hell. But in Sword Art Online, these time jumps are used so excessively and so frequently, it removes all the weight. And also, people just don't change. You'd think that the characters would change drastically, given that they're in a totally different environment for well over 2 years. But no, the characters don't change. I doubt they even age. It's really weird, because I thought Nerve Gear would scan their entire body. So do they age inside the game like they're aging in real life, or do they stay the same in the game and then end up looking really old in real life? I don't know, but these time jumps essentially are awful. Anyways, we have the transitional episode between first arc and second arc, and that is episode 15. And even though this is one of the lower rated episodes of the entire SAO, I actually friggin' love it. This is actually one of the rare episodes where the writing of the story feels more mature than it previously has been. First of all, it deals with the fact that people, after waking up from SAO, going back to real life, has to go to rehab, has to do physical therapy, because duh, they hadn't moved for over 2 years. You can see them in the hospitals. You can see Kirito being a very, very skinny person with long hair in real life, which makes a lot of sense. And we also see other real life consequences to this whole SAO thing. And I actually like that a lot, even though this episode isn't like that great or anything. But there's a sense of maturity and realism with this episode that I kinda appreciate. But that is as far as good episodes in SAO goes, because the rest of the season is pretty lackluster. The first arc, Aincrad, is frustrating. It's oxymoronic, actually. And then we have the second arc, which I don't think is as bad. But it's just plain boring because on episode 16 to 20, Kirito enters another MMO called Alfheim in order to save Asuna. Yep, minor spoiler alert, but Asuna did not wake up and go back to real life. She got transferred into Alfheim and got imprisoned by the game maker of Alfheim. So Kirito went to Alfheim, met another girl called Lifa, and together they venture around. And boy, these episodes are incredibly boring. We occasionally meet a few villains like the salamanders and then this and that. And at the end of the day, the salamanders did nothing. They did not provide anything to anything. They're not related to the overall story. They're just there for no reason. And then we have episode 21. With that scene. You know what scene I'm talking about. And yeah, a lot of TV shows have rape in them. You know, just Game of Thrones, for example. But Game of Thrones is a really serious drama show. While Sword Art Online doesn't exactly take itself too seriously, it has corny comedy, and sometimes it gets really dramatic, but never in a really realistic or mature way. So this scene just feels kind of out of place in my opinion. And then we have episode 22 where Kirito finally finds Asuna, and he tries his very best to sort of conquer a castle full of guardians, full of evil guardians. And this episode is another really frustrating episode because this episode just goes to prove that Kirito has got to be one of the most stupid characters in anime I've ever came across. He just blindly runs into the castle solo when other people like Lifa had told him that there have been raids, there have been tons of people who have tried to collectively conquer the castle and yet fail. So unless Kirito is really that overpowered, he will never make it. And turns out he didn't make it. But he didn't care. He tried to go again, which is absolutely stupid. It's really frustrating how foolish Kirito actually is. And then we have episodes 23 to 24, basically the final fight with Sugo, the game maker of Alfheim, and this fight is actually way better than the previous final fight. However, Sugo is such a typical villain. Every time Kirito or Asuna was pinned down, he would go over his evil master plan and then laugh evilly and hysterically. He is as typical of a villain as a villain can get. And then finally we have episode 25, which is basically the resolution episode. The arc is finally over and everybody's happy again. But what's really confusing about this ending is that after SAO and Alfheim, they decided to return to the MMOs again. I mean, sure, there has to be a third arc. I know, but it just makes no sense that everybody who has been the victims of these virtual MMOs that actually hurt and kill would return. I thought they're gonna have PTSD from these MMOs, but no, they're gonna return anyways because it's fun, I guess. It's just really confusing. I guess if there's one thing I can say about Sword Art Online that is positive is that the arc transitions between arcs are really smooth. In a lot of other animes, the arc transitions are just like one thing ends and another thing happens, not really all that related, but in Sword Art Online it is bridged pretty well. But aside from that, Sword Art Online is just one really frustrating experience. This has got to be the most frustrating anime experience I've ever experienced, and by miles. So yeah, the characters bland, the story poorly written, and I'm just gonna leave it at that. The art style isn't even all that groundbreaking. I mean, it's nowhere near as good as No Game No Life or Dorohedoro. It's just kinda acceptable, I guess. My favorite episode is episode 15. My least favorite is like every other episode. I'm giving Sword Art Online a strong 3 out of 10. Strong 3. Maybe to a light 4, but strong 3. So, have you watched Sword Art Online? From 1 to 10, how much is rated? Like it, and subscribe if you want more, and thanks for watching. I don't think I'm going to watch Sword Art Online anymore. It's just not for me. But tonight I'm going to start watching Jujutsu Kaisen, so that's exciting.